In sales, it's very binary. You are successful or you're not. You're hitting your number or you're not. And so I think having that high level of accountability was appreciated when I went into marketing. And I was just like, look, we're either performing or we're not. We have goals and we need to hit them. And I think bringing that just a high level of accountability wasn't just helpful as a leader, but also the team that I managed.
You're listening to the Standup from monday.com, where we talk to real leaders every episode to get their sharpest insights. So excited to have Devin Reed with us today on the podcast. Devin is the former head of content at Clarion Gong and was also previously an account executive before he transitioned into content marketing. And he now is the founder of The Reader, which is a consultancy focusing on content marketing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. And credit to you. That was one take, perfect intro. You're a pro at this.
It ain't my first rodeo.
Clearly.
Cool. Well, one of the things that I wanted to hear more about is this transition from being an account executive to marketing. On one hand, we talk a lot about sales and marketing alignment, but tell me about transitioning in that way and what made you look towards another career.
Well, one, I was bad at sales for a lot longer than I was good at it. At the last sales job I had, which was at Gong, during the interview process, I told my then VP, I'm not going to go into sales leadership. I'm not going to be a rep for life. I don't know if I'm going to move into marketing or sales enablement, but I just had this itch to do something else. Then it wasn't just to escape being bad at it. I eventually became okay to good. But one thing I really didn't like about sales was chasing people and like getting people interested. Like it's very hard as a sales rep doing your own outbound. And then I looked at marketing and it's kind of in a way sales at scale, which is like, hey, I can put a message out in different formats. And if you have the right tone and the right message, you'll actually attract people to you and they will want to talk to you and they'll want to buy from you potentially before you even met them. And so that was like always very mysterious to me. It felt like a superpower that some people had. And so I wanted to use some of those writing chops that I got as a lit major in college and see if I could pull it off.
Tell me about some of the skills that you felt like were the most transferable, that like every leader should kind of be working on if they're thinking about ever transitioning horizontally.
In sales, it's very binary. You are successful or you're not. You're hitting your number or you're not. And so I think having that high level of accountability was appreciated when I went into marketing. And I was just like, look, we're either performing or we're not. We have goals and we need to hit them. And I think bringing that just a high level of accountability wasn't just helpful as a leader, but also the team that I managed, which is like, it's kind of like you kind of embody, right? The personality a little bit of your manager, for better or worse, hopefully for better, mostly in my case.
We all hope that.
Yeah. And so I think the accountability was a big one. I think the other one, at least again, from my experience, was like, there's a lot of freedom in sales. I know there's a sales process and methodology, but when you're on a sales call, one-to-one, one-to-few, it's kind of just you. Like, and it's kind of like, what can you come up with? And I think moving over to marketing, creative freedom is huge, right? It's like the best marketing teams have budget and creative freedom. And so I think, at least for those two departments, I think that was really helpful, and maybe more general to other department to department, was just high curiosity and high humility. I was hungry to learn and I was quiet a lot. Like I'm just learning and listening. And I was really grateful that I had, Udi Lettergore at the time, CMO. And it's like, hey, if you're in a room with really talented people, it's a great time to be quiet and just listen to those answers. And then going back to accountability, applying those answers. So we have that kind of like full circle. I feel like that can help you make mostly probably any transition from one department to another.
I think those are two skills that we don't talk about enough in leadership, is listening and accountability, because we do talk about accountability in a certain sense of like, you're responsible for this team, et cetera, but not about kind of this cycle of first you've got to understand the problem, because eventually you're going to be accountable for it. And I feel like that's a pre-step that a lot of people don't take. What's your advice to leaders stepping into a new role that they don't know anything about it? This is a new role. Like, how can they be better listeners? What are things that they can do?
It kind of goes back to sales. When you're in sales, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to find the problems that you have, the pain that it's causing, and find out if I'm even a good fit for it. So I tried many times to get into marketing before I finally was able to make that transition. So I was very grateful for the opportunity. And I remember I'm like, if I mess up or if this fails, it won't be because I didn't try. It won't be because I didn't exhaust every option possible. And that's just me being gracious. Like I finally got the opportunity. I want to maximize it. So when I was in marketing or any leadership, it's like, what does your boss and your boss's boss really care about? I don't subscribe to your job is to make them look good, but your job is really good if it's to make, if you make them look good, then it helps a lot. So my thing was like, okay, great. I'm the now head of content, been in marketing for 2 months. Great. CMO, what do you expect from me? No BS. What's the bottom line? What do you need to see for me to be successful? When you're looking at a quarterly dashboard or you're talking to our CEO, what numbers are you going to bring to them that you care about? And that's where I started to like build my plan. So I think it's like, again, like I know we were talking before, like no fluff. Like I really want to know, what is the game we're playing? How do I become successful? And then I can build the plan around that and ask for help as needed. I just don't believe in like kind of winging it, or like anytime there's uncertainty, hesitation, I'm like, no, like let's lean into that. I think that's kind of the sales thing.
Right.
And like, hey, if I sense an objection, I'm going to lean into it and find out what it is. That way we have high transparency. And then you also know, hey, I can handle that. I'm seeking out direct feedback, direct instruction, and I'm following through with it.
And I think this ties a little bit to what we were talking about before about cutting through like the fluff in the organization. Like it's not just about the bottom line when you're speaking to your executive. It's also about like, you have to deal with a lot of shit, right? You have to deal with like office politics. You have to deal with a lot of things that are going around. You have to deal with people's hands in lots of different places. Because one of the things you talk a lot about is kind of getting through and doing innovative programs that maybe weren't traditional to what you were typically asked to do. How did you do that?
I think a lot of time in at least a marketing role, especially content marketing, produce and more content and just crank out more content.
What about another blog post, right?
Yeah, why not just spin up a quick podcast? Because that's super easy, which it is easy to do poorly.
Right.
It's hard to do at the level that we all want and expect, right? One of the things I've learned is my job is to set and protect the strategy. Now, setting the strategy is your vision. So we just talked about what goals does the CEO and CMO care about? How can I build a plan around that? What I didn't know until my second time around as a head of content is how much I have to protect the strategy. Not to be closed-minded, but I was head of content. If I'm not the best content marketer in the company, I shouldn't be there. So my job is to educate other people, the non-marketing executives usually, when you're like, you're in the C-suite meeting, or sometimes even your CMO, they're not always so in the know of social or so in the know of kind of like recent trends. So when I'm saying, hey, here's our strategy and here's the playbook of how we're going to get there, that protect isn't to be closed off, but it's to help people understand what decisions you're making and why you're making them. And then also to invite questions and call it feedback. And so the other thing is like I learned too is like not all feedback is even relevant. Like sometimes you get things from a head of business ops that's like, thank you for that. And in your head, you're like, doesn't apply. But but you need to be cordial about it because you don't want to come across as like, my big fear is like content island.
Right.
Oh, that guy thinks he has it all figured out. He just does his little thing over in the corner and he doesn't understand how to make a bigger impact and to communicate that impact. So I think that was like something that I've really practiced. And so when I go into those meetings, I have a very aware of the audience and very aware of they're probably looking for the bottom line, but they also need a story because no one context switches more than a CXO at a SaaS company, right? 2,000 Slacks a day, 50 meetings, all that stuff. Like if I get 25 minutes or less with the C-suite, I need to be memorable, I need to be punchy, and I need to lead with data. Like those are the things that they care about.
How do you communicate that to your team? We talked a lot about going up, but now you've also got to make sure that your change is aligned and there might be changes happening along the way. Yeah. You've got to figure out how to communicate that. What were some strategies that worked for you there?
I really believe in transparency. I think like my job was never, hey, I'm the one talking to the CMO more than you, so therefore I hold the keys.
Right.
Unless it's just one of those few things that you want to protect your team from, they don't need to hear that day. I'm like, hey, team, you know the strategy because I brought it to you first.
Right.
I actually always did that. I don't know if that's a norm. I just was like, if I build something, I go to my team to say, this is what we're doing. But I also want to leave 10% for them to co-create it with me and feel like they're part of the plan too, not just being like dictated what to do. And then when I take that to those C-suite meetings, CMO conversations, what have you, I'm always like in the next team meeting, which we did about weekly, is like, hey, by the way, here's like 2 things that I heard. I just want y'all to know. Here's where there was doubt. Hey, Nehal, you're on social. Just so you know, people do not understand social, just for example, right? So when you're working on your playbook and strategy, just keep that in mind that we are reshaping how this company views social media. We need to keep that in mind. Hey, by the way, they really love these 2 things. So hey, lean into that. When you have that kind of free-flowing information exchange, I find that just to be very helpful. I don't want them to be in the dark. And I don't want them to just feel like I just show up and I do what Devin tells me.
I'd love to chat with you. We have a section on this podcast called How I Failed. Love to hear about something you failed at.
I don't have many regrets, but there's one that I wish I could get back, which was probably 2021. I remember it was pandemic, like peak pandemic. We had just had our first child. She was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months old.
Wow.
I was new-ish to a leadership role, had finally, I had been ahead of content, but I had like a team, like a bigger team now, and I felt more responsibility. I'm trying to get to that like director level,
Right.
I remember I used to have a pretty good rule about 5 p.m. cutoff. And I was like, now that I have, my kid, I want to stop at 5. I remember working on something in the other room. We're in a small shoebox apartment in San Francisco. So like family room, me in the other room. And I remember my wife and her parents were there with Rumi, our first daughter. And I hear like laughter. And I'm like, one more thing, I'm almost done. I'm going to get this thing going. And they're like, hey, Deb, come over here. And I'm like, yeah, one sec. I was working and my wife texted me. She goes, Rumi just rolled over for the first time. And I was just on the other side of the wall. And so like, I get emotional talking about that because I was like, okay, great. Never again. What is 12 more minutes at work? I can do this when she's asleep. So like, I would say that's a fail, but I remember turning it into a win. Like I do get emotional, but like now when that opportunity comes where, hey, dad, get on another flight or work an extra hour. I'm like, is that really the trade-off? Yeah. Is it really worth it? And I remember that memory of like, you're there, but you're not there.
Right.
And this can wait. Like, yeah, it sucks working at 9, 10 p.m., but would you rather miss another rollover? You know what I mean? That sort of thing. So ever since then, me and my wife were like, all right, we have like agreed and like positive non-negotiables. Like I don't miss birthdays, like, all those like things that you talk through. And so I kind of had to miss a big early one to set the, you know what I mean? To kind of give me a good trajectory for the rest of my working dad career.
I think every working parent has a story like that. Every single one has something like that they missed or that they almost missed or that because of which way or the other, it felt like it was a new boundary for them. And I think it's really, really important that you recognize that as somebody with a high-powered career to say, nope, I'm not missing a birthday and I'm not traveling on this weekend and I'm not going to miss this holiday dinner. Yeah. What advice do you have for other working dads? Because I don't think it's talked about enough, frankly.
It's not, and I'm glad you asked, and I chose that answer because I was like, do I share that or not? And I think it's like a little, mom guilt, dad guilt, right. Like we have it. And I think the word boundary is super important, which at that moment, I didn't really have a boundary. I said 5 p.m., but I wasn't convicted at 5 p.m. means 5 p.m. So I think the first thing is like, accept that you are going to misstep while you set those boundaries because it's new. Like I literally I'm a new dad and I'm a new boss. I didn't know how to juggle both. I didn't know. I felt the pressure to do one over the other. So I think one is like, we have the phrase since then in our house, which is give yourself the space and grace. Luckily, Rumi doesn't remember because she was 5 months or whatever, however old babies are when they roll over. So I think one is like giving yourself the space and grace. And then 2 is setting up those non-negotiables. Right. And I have to remember I'm still growing and pushing myself, but as a dad. And that's what's going to matter most. Like the legacy is like, your kids and how your family remembers you, not did you get on one more business trip? Did you do one more half an hour of work? So I think like boundaries and space and grace would be my advice.
Yeah, I think those are really important lessons to learn. And it continues to happen. The kids grow and you're still going to make mistakes. And about giving yourself the space to have those. We talk a lot about on the mom side. I get asked it a lot, but I don't feel like it's talked enough about the dad. And the more that I meet working dads, the more they all have the same struggles, which I think that's something.
Dad guilt is very, very real. When we're with our family, we feel like we should be working to make money. And when we're working to make money, we feel like we should be with our family. Exactly. Yeah. Which is why I say work-life blur. I don't think balance is a real thing.
What's one thing that all marketing teams should be focusing on this year?
Audience growth. I'll say it to you regularly. Audience growth. The world is changing and whoever has the most niche audience is usually winning. The largest audience doesn't necessarily matter, but a lot of times it's like, how do we get, we have a new product, we have a new feature, we want to launch and change the world. Cool. If you have no email subscribers, if you have no social followers, like you're kind of launching into the void, or you're playing the old school game of like PR, which there's a time and a place, but I think it's not the best way to go about it. So I would say like, I meet with a lot and consult with a few, right? Because that's how the world works. And I don't know if I've seen but one KPI on audience growth. And I'm shocked by that because we all love people with followers and subscribers. And it's important, but we just like,
that's also
not
the
part
way
of the
world
team
works now.
Yeah. I mean, if you have 100,000 followers or subscribers, you can sell a lot of software or services. Yeah. So it's like, it's a superpower. And I've experienced it firsthand at the companies I've worked for and now myself, where it's like, you can have a lot of genuine influence and you can hit a lot of KPIs a lot easier and a lot faster when you have that built-in audience to launch into.
And what have you learned about marketing since starting your own business that you think is applicable to all companies?
Okay, now that I'm the one cutting the budget and spending the budget, I need a clear path to success. And it doesn't always have to be revenue. So for me, it's like you get brutally honest with yourself of like, is this time and dollar resource really worth it? Because every time you place a bet here, you're not placing one here, or you're not scaling something that works here. So for me, I'm like a little bit, I wouldn't say maniacal about efficiency, because I love to take big creative bets. But like even my show, Read Between the Lines, we travel the country, we have a video crew. It's like, that's a big bet. That's a big brand bet. No one's coming to me and being like, hey, I saw your podcast and that's why I'm going to hire you.
Right.
But I also know that, one, I want to measure, well, what are the things we are going to measure that the channel is successful? And two, having that belief of, well, I believe if we put out premium content marketing and we sell content marketing services, that's going to help our trust in the market, 100%. Our perception. And the benefit has been when people come to me, and I'm sure others have experienced this too, is like they're 90% sold.
Right.
They're literally like, hey, so tell me exactly how you work and how much it costs versus who are you and why should I work with you? Right. It's like, if I get a why should I work with you question, it's almost like a weird alarm in my head of like, we're missing something because you should usually know by now. Yeah.
That's a great piece of advice. What's holding most content teams back from success?
I would say a clear documented strategy. So the what and the why, that's my thing. And then two, I would say is a playbook that has clear step-by-step process to run a program or a channel. Unfortunately, we just don't have the time to sit down and document all this stuff. So it's kind of like this collective knowledge of like, I know what you expect, so I operate in that way, but it's not written down anywhere. We were talking earlier about like protecting your strategy. How do you protect your strategy when you don't have it written down? How do you scale your content marketing when you don't have it written down? So I think the strategy is a very big component of it. Most people, fortunately, can do it. They just don't have the time allotted. The other one is like playbooks. For every team that I've ever managed, every channel or like a content program, if it's maybe like thought leadership, has a step-by-step from ideation, production, publication, measurement. What exactly are those steps? How do you close the loop? And so I think those are just the things missing that are kind of fundamental. When you think about how do I operate faster and better, it's like, well, do you have a playbook you're running? If not, if you're kind of doing like random acts of content or, well, sometimes we do it this way, sometimes we do it that way, that's a really hard way to scale. And that's kind of what leads to burnout, I think, a lot of times.
We have kind of a section where we ask a few rapid fire questions. So coffee or tea?
Coffee. But trying to get into tea.
Oh, really? Me too. Favorite way to unwind?
The disciplined answer is a walk is the best one. The realistic one is I've also mastered a 5-minute power nap.
Oh, that's a good
I fall asleep for like a minute
yeah.
and then I wake up like, gotta keep going.
My sister's like that. Yeah. And your best one-sentence piece of advice?
Success is wanting what you have and have what you want.
What's a piece of media, TV show, something that you just can't live without right now?
Ooh, I'm really into, I think I'm saying his name correct, Ogilvy, the famous copywriter.
Yeah, David Ogilvy.
David Ogilvy. He has a book called Ogilvy on Advertising. And it is shockingly applicable, 30, 40 years later to like the marketing that you and I do in SAT. It's surprisingly applicable.
Crazy.
And it's really interesting, like how he writes headlines, how he thinks about formatting text. Like he nerds out in the way that like fills my soul as a marketer.
Awesome. Well, Devin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
If our listeners want to hear more about you or learn more about you, what can they do?
LinkedIn is probably best. So Devin Reed, 2 E's in Reed, or go to thereader.co. And I say not .com. It was too expensive. So it's thereader.co.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It was great having Devin on the show today. 3 lessons that stood out to me were 1, the transferable skills from being an account executive to a marketing executive. And what did that transition look like? And how important it was to really focus on data and cut through the fluff. The second was the real life struggles of being a working dad. What did it mean to set healthy boundaries when you had a young child at home? And the third is about how to communicate strategy from the top all the way down to your team, and the importance of making sure that you have lots of touch points so you don't become a blocker. It was really thought-provoking to sit down with Devin, and I'm excited to take some of those lessons and implement them with my team tomorrow. Our next stand-up is in 2 weeks. Before you go, if you found this episode thought-provoking, consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about our conversation or more takeaways to help with all the leadership roles you play, visit monday.com or sign up for our newsletter. Links are in the show notes. We'll see you at our next stand-up.